Millionaire sees his black employee face it all for her father, and the story moves everyone. Jasmine had learned early in life that no one was going to come knocking at her door, bringing her anything on a silver platter. Everything she owned had been earned with her own hands, and she knew that better than anyone. That's why when she finally got the job as manager at the Sterling estate, she treated that position like the most precious thing she had ever touched in her life. And it was. The estate was large, spread over several floors, with dozens of apartments overlooking Chicago, a city that never stopped growing. Julian Sterling, the owner of it all, was too young to have so much, but smart enough to make good business choices, most of the time. He showed up there in a dark suit, white shirt, understated tie, with that air of someone always in a hurry to get somewhere more important. Not that he was arrogant, he was just distant. The kind of man who values punctuality, demands results, and never asks how you're doing. Jasmine understood that type. She herself was efficient, direct, and didn't like any runaround. What she didn't expect was Mr. Silas. Julian's father lived on the third floor, in the corner apartment that caught the afternoon sun. He was a man with completely white hair, shoulders slightly bowed under the weight of the years, but with a gaze still alive and full of stories. He had a habit of coming down to the lobby every morning, sitting on that wooden chair near the planter, and watching the building's comings and goings. And every time Jasmine walked by, he would say something. "Good morning, my dear. You're here earlier today." She would laugh. "You're the one who came down later, Mr. Silas." It was these small exchanges, made of simple phrases and discreet smiles, that wove a bond between the two. A bond that Jasmine didn't even realize when it started to truly matter to her. But it was precisely that bond that put her in the middle of a situation she never imagined she would have to face. It all started with the renovation of the 5th floor. Julian had hired Frank to renovate 4 units at the same time. Frank was a long-time supplier, someone Julian's own father had introduced more than 20 years ago, and because of that, he had almost unrestricted access to the building. He came and went with the workers, brought in materials, left debris in the wrong places, and always had an excuse ready at the tip of his tongue. He was a burly man in his mid-40s, always wearing that orange hard hat, even when he wasn't on any job site, as if the gear were part of the character he wanted to be. Jasmine began noticing things little by little. First, the invoices that didn't match the material she saw being unloaded. Then the quality of what was being installed, cheaper tile than what was specified. Spackle she knew well because she had renovated her own house years ago and knew exactly how much it cost. And then came the delays, always with a different excuse. Problem with the supplier, a worker who didn't show up, material that arrived wrong. She wrote it all down, with dates, with amounts, with the names of those present. When she brought the little notebook to Julian, he listened to her attentively for about 2 minutes before glancing at his phone. "Frank has been working with me for a long time, Jasmine. He may have made a mistake somewhere, but he's not the type to do something like that on purpose." She swallowed the response that came first. She took a deep breath. "I understand, Julian, but the numbers don't add up. It's been almost 3 months of work, and it was supposed to take 1. Someone is making money off this delay. I'll talk to him." And that's what he did. But Julian's conversation with Frank lasted about 5 minutes, ended with the two of them laughing at some joke Jasmine didn't hear, and changed nothing. Look, when I first read this part, I felt that tightness in the chest of someone who's been through the situation of trying to warn someone about something wrong and not being taken seriously. Because it's not just about the problem itself, it's about feeling like your word doesn't carry the same weight as someone else's. But Jasmine didn't give up. That was the kind of thing she had learned in life. Whoever gives up at the first closed door doesn't get far. She kept watching, and what she discovered next changed everything. On a Thursday afternoon, when Frank and the workers had already left, she went up to the 5th floor to check on the progress of the work. The doors of the units being renovated were open, and she went in using her phone's flashlight. What she saw sent a chill down her spine. Behind the already plastered walls of one of the bathrooms, there were plastic pipes of a grade well below what was specified in the original contract, the kind of material that holds up for a while but gives way under heat and pressure. In apartments like those with older and vulnerable residents, any plumbing issue would turn into a problem of enormous proportions. She photographed everything, every corner, every detail, every difference between what was installed and what was on paper. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out since we're just starting now. Continuing. The next morning, Jasmine arrived earlier than usual. Mr. Silas was already in his chair in the entrance hall with a cup of coffee in his hands. "You seem different today," he said, with that look that never missed a thing. "I'm fine, Mr. Silas." "No, you're not." He paused. "Sit here for a minute." She sat down, and to this day she doesn't know why she told him. Maybe because he was Julian's father, and knew things she didn't. Maybe because there was something about that man that made her feel she could be honest without fear of judgment. Mr. Silas listened to everything without interrupting. When she finished, he stayed quiet for a moment, looking at the cup in his hands. Then he said, "Frank was my brother's friend before he was mine. I've known his character for decades. You're not wrong, my dear." And then he told her something Jasmine didn't expect to hear. Frank had a nephew who worked in Julian's financial department, a young guy named Justin, who processed the payments before any review. Mr. Silas had seen the two of them talking in secret more than once over the past few months, always around lunchtime, always with that look of people who don't want to be seen. At the time, he hadn't thought much of it because he couldn't imagine the extent of it. Jasmine understood right away. It went deeper than she had imagined. The problem was that she now had a serious dilemma in front of her. If she went straight to Julian with this information, he could dismiss her again. After all, he had already done it once. If she went to Justin first, he could destroy any evidence before anyone got there. And if she waited too long, Frank would finish the job, receive the full amount and disappear without leaving a visible trace. She spent 2 days weighing every step, sleepless nights going over the documents, reordering the dates, looking for the right way to present it all so no one could ignore it. It was on the 3rd day that things got out of control. Frank arrived at the building that morning in a different mood than usual, his eyes narrower, his shoulders tense, the walk of someone looking for a way out and not finding one yet. Jasmine noticed it as soon as he came through the gate, but she had no idea what was on his mind. She found out later that Justin had warned him that Jasmine was gathering evidence, that she had photos, that it was only a matter of days before everything would reach Julian in a way he couldn't ignore. Frank went up to the 5th floor, pretended to work for an hour, and then came back down. He stopped in front of Jasmine with that broad stance, the orange hard hat still on his head, and said in a low voice, not wanting witnesses, "You need to hand over those photos." She stared at him. "What photos?" "Don't do this, Jasmine. I know what you have. And you know that if you hurt me, I'll do the same to you. I can find a way to show Julian that you were the one who messed up the contracts, that you were the one who authorized the wrong material. I'm not afraid of threats. It's not a threat. It's a warning." He took another step closer. "I've known Julian since he was a young boy. You're an employee, a new employee. Who do you think he's going to believe?" She didn't answer, and he didn't stop there. Frank then said he was going to seal Mr. Silas's apartment that very day for security reasons, an excuse he had prepared, an alleged structural risk near the unit, documentation that Justin would arrange internally, and the apartment would remain inaccessible until Julian himself authorized its release. It would be direct pressure on her. Either she handed over the photos or the old man would be left without access to his own home until the situation was resolved on Frank's terms. I had to stop here when I first read this, because using an elderly man as leverage in a dispute like this, there are things that just don't sit right with me. Jasmine felt the anger rise with a force she rarely allowed herself. It wasn't the anger of someone who is afraid. It was the anger of someone who had waited patiently and was watching the line being crossed deliberately. She stayed quiet for a second, and then she said with a firm and calm voice, "Go ahead and try." Frank didn't expect that. He thought she would back down like so many other people had backed down in front of him over the years. Half an hour later, he was in the hallway on the 3rd floor with 2 workers beside him, pointing at the door of Mr. Silas's apartment, holding a piece of paper he called a technical notice, but that had no protocol number, no valid signature, no seal that justified anything. Mr. Silas stood on the threshold of his own door, shoulders tensed, eyes wide, not understanding what was happening. "You can't come in here for now," Frank said, with a tone that sounded like authority but had none. "There's a structural risk being assessed." "But I live here," Mr. Silas replied, his voice trying not to tremble. "My things are in there." "It's temporary." "What risk? Nobody told me anything." That was when Jasmine appeared in the hallway. She had heard the conversation through the intercom while still at the front desk and went up in one go without waiting for the elevator. When she entered that narrow hallway and saw the scene, the old man leaning against his own door, the workers blocking the passage, Frank pointing that worthless piece of paper at the face of a man who owed nothing to anyone, something inside her settled with a clarity that surprised even her. She crossed the hallway with a firm step, placed her open hand on Frank's chest and pushed him back firmly. "Stop!" Frank turned to her with an expression that mixed surprise and barely contained anger. "You're going to stop me from doing my job?" "You don't have any job here. This apartment isn't in the scope of the renovation, and that paper you're holding doesn't have anyone's signature. It has no legal validity. It has nothing. You don't have the authority to... I'm the manager of this building, and what you're doing right now is preventing a resident from accessing his own unit with no justification whatsoever. If you don't leave this hallway in the next 2 minutes, I'll call the person legally responsible for this building, which is Julian Sterling." The silence that followed was heavy. One of the workers took a discreet step back. The other looked at Frank, waiting for an answer that never came. Frank crushed the crumpled paper in his hands. His eyes swept the hallway, landed on Jasmine's face, then on Mr. Silas's, and returned to her. There was a mix of calculation and anger in his expression that she recognized as the moment someone decides whether or not to keep betting on a bad hand. "You're making a very big mistake. I've made bigger mistakes in my life. Get out of the hallway." It was exactly at that moment that the elevator door opened. Julian Sterling stepped into the hallway in a dark suit, white shirt with the collar open, with an air of someone who hadn't expected any of that at all. He had come for a quick visit to his father, one of those visits he was always putting off, and that on that day he had finally decided to put off no longer. But what he found was an entire other world waiting for him. He stood still for a few seconds, looking at the whole scene. His father leaning against the door of his own apartment, the workers backed away, Frank with the crumpled paper in his hand, and Jasmine between them with the expression of someone who isn't going to move even an inch. I don't know about you, but this moment hit me in a different way. Because sometimes life puts the right person in the right place at the right time, not by chance, but because that person spent their entire life preparing for it without even knowing. "What's going on here?" Julian asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that everyone felt. Frank opened his mouth to speak first. Jasmine was faster. "Frank tried to block your father's access to his own apartment using a technical notice with no legal standing whatsoever. No signature, no protocol number. I've been documenting the irregularities on the 5th floor construction site for weeks. Material below what was specified in the contract, invoices that don't match what was delivered, and deliberate delays to keep billing without any real work being done. In addition, there's a connection between him and Justin from your finance department that needs to be investigated urgently." She said all of this in a direct manner. No drama, no tremor in her voice, like someone who had internally rehearsed every word for days and had finally gotten the chance to speak them to the people who needed to hear them. Julian didn't look at Frank. He looked at his father. "Dad, are you okay?" Mr. Silas nodded, but there were tears in his eyes, not from sadness, from relief. "I am, son, thanks to her." Frank tried to intervene. "Julian, you've known me for years. You're going to believe some employee who—" "Frank." Julian's voice cut through the hallway without needing a shout. "Leave the building now. We're going to talk, but not here and not now." Frank left. The workers followed, and the hallway fell quiet in a way that seemed charged with everything that had just happened in that small space. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like, and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. In the days that followed, Julian did something Jasmine had never seen any boss do. He listened, really, with full attention, and without glancing at his phone even once. He asked for every record she had kept, the photos, the notes with dates, the invoices that didn't add up. He hired an outside accountant to review every payment made to Frank's company over the past 8 months. What they found was worse than Jasmine had imagined. Justin had authorized advance payments with no real work behind them, inflated amounts in at least 3 different contracts over the course of the year, and had received transfers from a company whose name appeared as a service provider, but which, after a more careful search, belonged to Frank's wife. It was a structure built over time precisely to look ordinary to anyone giving it a quick glance. To someone who didn't know what they were looking for, everything seemed normal. Julian sat staring at those documents for a long time. The table in front of him was covered in papers, side-by-side comparisons, numbers that didn't lie. Jasmine was sitting on the other side, waiting. "Why didn't you give up?" he finally asked. His voice had a different quality now. It wasn't the distant boss he usually was. It was a man trying to understand something that had been right in front of him, without him seeing it. "I didn't believe you the first time you came to talk to me. It would have been easy to just let it go." She thought for a moment, before answering, carefully. "Because your father lives in this building, and because I know what it's like to see someone vulnerable being taken advantage of by someone with more power in the situation. I've spent my whole life trying not to look away when that happens. I couldn't do it this time either." Julian went quiet. After what felt like a long moment, he simply said, "You're right, and I was wrong when I didn't listen to you before." It was simple, direct, with no beating around the bush. But for Jasmine, who had heard justifications for so long, it was one of the most honest things anyone had said to her in many years. Justin was let go that same week. The contract with Frank was formally terminated, and an independent engineer was brought in to assess everything that had been done wrong in the 5th-floor units. The list of necessary repairs was extensive, and the entire cost would fall on Frank's company, who was notified with detailed documentation of what had been identified. But what truly remained from this whole story, wasn't any of those practical and necessary resolutions. It was a Saturday afternoon, a few weeks later, when Jasmine was doing her usual rounds through the building and passed through the entrance hall. Mr. Silas was in his wooden chair as always, but with a book on his lap that he wasn't even reading. He was staring off into space with that expression of someone thinking about something that had been kept locked away for a long time. He looked up when he heard her approach. "Sit here." She sat without rushing. "I want to tell you something," he said, his voice a little lower than usual. "When I was young, I worked in a place where people like you were treated as if they had no voice, as if their word weighed less than anyone else's. I saw it happen many times and did nothing. I stayed quiet because it was easier that way, and that stays with me to this day more than 50 years later." He paused, looking at his own hands. "You did that afternoon in the hallway what I should have had the courage to do back then. And I want you to know that I saw everything, that I haven't forgotten and I won't forget." Jasmine felt her throat tighten in a way she didn't expect. It wasn't the kind of emotion that came from sadness. It was the kind that arrives when someone finally names something you've carried in silence for years, without anyone noticing the weight. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Silas. It's not a debt, my dear." He looked at her with that lively gaze she had learned to recognize. "It's recognition. Those are completely different things." She nodded, and the two of them stayed there for a while, in the entrance hall of that big building, with the sun coming through the side window of the afternoon, without needing to say anything more than what had already been said. Julian showed up with a formal proposal a few weeks later. Jasmine would be promoted to Director of Operations for all of the Sterling family's properties, not just that one estate, but a larger portfolio of properties he was expanding. The offer came with a considerable raise, her own team, and real autonomy to make decisions without having to ask for approval at every step. She accepted. But what she never forgot, the detail that stayed with her in a way the others didn't, was something small that Mr. Silas had said on the morning right after the commotion in the hallway, when she had gone upstairs to check if he was all right. He opened the door, looked at her with that look that was both weary and alive, and said, "Do you know what courage looks like when it's real? It doesn't yell. It simply doesn't move from where it stands." Jasmine carried that with her wherever she went from then on, not like a trophy to be displayed, like a quiet reminder of who she had always been, long before anyone needed to see it. End of story. This story stayed with me in a way I didn't expect when I started telling it. Jasmine didn't ask to be in the middle of any of that, but she was there, with her eyes wide open, with her notes taken, with the patience of someone who knows that the truth has to be built, not just spoken. And when the time came, she didn't look away. And Mr. Silas, that character truly touched me deeply. There's something very rare about someone who has lived a long life, who carries the weight of their own past mistakes with honesty, and who recognizes in another person what he didn't have the courage to be in his own time. That meeting between generations, where the elder learns as much as he teaches, is the kind of thing life offers every now and then, and we can't let it pass by. If this story moved you in any way, tell us about it in the comments. Where are you watching from? What would you have done in Jasmine's place in a situation like that? Leave your opinion. I read every single one. Don't forget to like, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now's the perfect time. There are plenty more stories like this one waiting for you here. Thank you so much for keeping me company today.